two teenage girls, two babysitting jobs, two phone calls from a man claiming to have a wife and a young child. Neither girl was the first choice. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through two cases separated by years and hundreds of miles. Two girls in two different countries. Two families who waited for answers that never fully came. I've spent a long time with these stories. I've read the files, the newspaper accounts, the forum threads where strangers argued long after midnight about what it all meant. And I keep arriving at the same question, one that law enforcement never officially answered, one that no court ever had to weigh in on because no suspect was ever charged. Were these crimes connected, or are we staring at the signature of a predator who was never caught? I don't have an answer for you, but I think the question deserves to be asked out loud. The girl who took the bus. The first girl, I'll call her Mara, and was 14 years old. 14, which is old enough to want independence and young enough to trust that the world has rules that will protect you. She was, by all accounts, responsible. The kind of kid who remembered to text her parents back, who helped with her younger siblings without being asked, who, when she saw a handwritten index card pinned to the community board at the library, thought, I could do that. A babysitting, easy money, a family new to the area needing occasional help. She called the number. The man who answered had a calm voice, polite, unhurried. He had the particular quality of someone who has told a story many times and gotten very good at it. He mentioned his wife. He mentioned their young child. He mentioned that they just moved and didn't know many people yet. Everything about the call sounded ordinary. That was the point. They arranged a time. He gave her an address, and she told her mother she'd be home by dinner. She took the bus. The route was one she knew. The stop she was heading for was 2 towns over. Not far, just unfamiliar. She had her bag with her. A notebook, probably. Something to do if the child napped. No one on the bus remembered her, which is not unusual. We don't tend to notice teenage girls on buses unless something goes wrong. Something went wrong. Mara never reached her destination. Her mother called the number from the library card when her daughter didn't come home for dinner. It rang. No one answered. She called again, and again. She filed a missing persons report that night. The officer who took her statement would later say he didn't expect it to go anywhere. That most missing teens turned up within 48 hours, embarrassed and apologetic. Mara did not. There was no body, no witnesses, no phone records. The number on that index card, when traced, led to a payphone that no longer existed. No answers. She vanished into the space between a bus stop and a promise of easy money. The girl who got in the car, now we move. Different country, different decade. A small town where everyone knows everyone, which should make it safe, and in many ways does. People leave their doors unlocked. Kids walk home alone. Teenagers babysit. The second girl, I'll call her Lee, was 15. She babysat regularly, or had a small list of regular families, a decent reputation, a mother who knew where she was going and when she'd be back. Everything was in order until a new family moved to town. The man who called asked if Lee was available on a specific evening. He had a calm voice, polite, unhurried. He mentioned his wife, who was quiet in the background. He said, busy with the unpacking. He mentioned their young child. He said a neighbor had recommended Lee. He said her name specifically. Whoa, that detail, her name, made her feel chosen, vouched for, safe. What Lee didn't know What her mother didn't know was that Lee was not the first girl he called. There had been at least one other name before hers, a girl who'd been unavailable that evening, or who hadn't answered, or whose mother had said no without quite knowing why. Lee was the backup. She got ready. She told her mother where she was going. She got into the man's car when he came to collect her, because that's how it was done sometimes. He'd offered, it seemed convenient, and everything about him seemed ordinary. That's the moment. She got into the car. Lee would be found. She survived, though I am not going to detail what happened to her. That is her story, not mine to narrate. What I will tell you is that she was found, she spoke to investigators, and she gave a description. The man was never found. The pattern emerges. Let me lay these cases side by side for a moment, because I think that's where this gets difficult to dismiss. In both cases, a teenage girl between 14 and 16. In both cases, a handwritten or word-of-mouth advertisement for babysitting. In both cases, a man with a calm, unremarkable voice. A wife mentioned but never seen. A young child mentioned but never confirmed. In both cases, the girl selected was not the original target. That last detail is the one I can't stop thinking about. One, because most predatory crimes have a specific target, an obsession, a fixation on a particular person, the stalking, the grooming, the careful accumulation of access. It's usually personal. This wasn't that. This was a system that accepted substitutions. What kind of predator doesn't care who answers the phone? Only that someone does? The psychological profile that emerges from the pattern. And I want to be careful here, because I am not a forensic psychologist, and I'm speculating based on publicly available case details. The profile suggests someone methodical, patient, comfortable with the logistics of deception. The script, wife, child, new to town, needs help, is simple enough to remember, flexible enough to adjust. The urgency is calibrated, not so frantic it raises flags, not so casual it fails to compel. And the backup babysitter detail suggests something else. It suggests practice. Was this escalation? When had he done this before? Smaller violations or near misses, or times when the plan fell apart before it reached the point of no return? Or had this worked before, and we just didn't know about it yet? Some killers hunt, others shop. Distance doesn't mean safety. I know what the skeptical response to this is, because I had it too. Different countries, different decades, different law enforcement jurisdictions with no shared database, no formal reason to compare notes. It's a pattern, yes, but patterns emerge from coincidence too. Two girls, two crimes, similar MO could just mean that this particular method of gaining access to victims is not uniquely clever. That more than one person has thought of it. That's a fair objection. But let me offer some context, because distance is less protective than we'd like to believe. Truck routes cover thousands of miles and cross international borders. Temporary work, construction, seasonal labor, logistics, moves men across continents on irregular schedules that are difficult to trace after the fact. Family connections, property, itinerant patterns, all of these create legitimate reasons to be in a place for a short period of time and then not be there anymore. Investigators working cold cases across jurisdictions consistently note the same challenge. By the time a pattern is visible, the man at the center of it has moved on. And because no one was looking for a connection to begin with, no one thought to track where he went. What if the distance isn't a flaw in the theory? What if the distance is the point? I want you to sit with a question for a moment. How many times do you think this worked? Not how many times we know about. How many times it actually worked? Meaning, a girl answered the phone, got in a car or stepped off a bus, and no one ever connected a calm voice on a phone line to what happened next. Do we know about Mara because she disappeared entirely, and that absence is hard to ignore? We know about Lee because she survived, but between those two outcomes, there's a lot of space. The man with a script. Let me tell you what I think we know about him. Not his name. I don't have his name. And even if I did, I wouldn't be in a position to say it here without evidence that a court has tested. What I mean is, the shape of him, assembled from the details both cases left behind. He had a calm voice. Multiple people who heard it described it the same way. Not warm exactly, but not cold. Just ordinary. The voice of someone who has learned that ordinary is the most disarming thing you can be. He had a prepared story. The wife, the child, new to town, needed help. It's a story engineered to produce two specific feelings in the person hearing it: trust and the small pleasure of being needed. He understood that people want to help. He built his approach around that. Oh, he was adaptable. When the first girl was unavailable, he called another. There was no apparent frustration in his manner, no urgency that tipped anyone off. He moved to the next name as calmly as you'd move down a grocery list. He was patient. The setup, placing an ad, waiting for calls, screening, arranging, takes time. A person who panics or acts impulsively doesn't work this way. This was deliberate. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a system. I think about Mara's mother, who kept the index card, who called that number over and over for years in the early days, just to hear it ring, because a ringing phone was still a connection, still a thread, still something. I think about Lee's family, the particular difficulty of having a daughter who survived, but who carries something that didn't end when she walked out of that situation. The way a community rallies and then, over time, quietly moves on, even as the family can't. And I keep arriving at this. If Lee had not survived, if there had been no description, no account, no surviving witness, would anyone have looked for a pattern at all? Would Mara's case have stayed in a file somewhere, unconnected, unseen? One victim surviving is what made a pattern visible, but surviving isn't the same as justice, and a visible pattern isn't the same as an answer. Unsolved but not unconnected. No suspect was ever charged. No confession was ever recorded. In no courtroom ever heard these two cases placed side by side and asked to decide whether the same hand was responsible for both. And the phone calls stopped, which could mean many things. It could mean that Lee's survival scared him off, that the risk of a description circulating was too high. It could mean he moved somewhere new and started over with a different method. It could mean he's dead. It could mean he was caught for something else and is sitting in a prison somewhere under a conviction that has nothing to do with the crimes I've described tonight. It could mean all of those things are true of different people. It could mean it was one person and the distance was the point. I don't know. I keep coming back to the index card on the library board. The handwriting, described as neat, unremarkable, slightly small. The kind of handwriting that belongs to no one in particular. The kind of handwriting that you'd pass 100 times without remembering it. And I think he knew that. He counted on that. He built his whole method around being forgettable. Somewhere a man knew the perfect way to make a girl disappear. He knew how to sound safe, how to sound ordinary, how to make a teenager feel trusted rather than targeted. He had a script, and the world never learned his name. If this story left you unsettled, hit that like button to let the algorithm know these kinds of cases deserve attention. Drop a comment below. Do you think these cases are connected or just a tragic coincidence? Have you ever heard a similar story in your area? If you want more deep dives into the cases that still haunt us, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who babysits, someone with teenage daughters, someone who still believes it could never happen here, share this video with them right now. The more people listen, the harder it is for patterns like this to stay hidden. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there.